Hello and welcome again to yet another episode of This Week in Christian History. And we are talking today about Valentine's Day and Saint Valentine. And was he a real guy? And what's this all about? Is he kind of like Saint Patrick? Are the same? Are they myth? Are they legend? Who were they? How were they? And we're glad to have as our guest today Dr. Lisa Bitel, who is a professor of history and religion at the University of Southern California. And do we say Dornsife? Is that the
Northside.
name? Okay, that's the college that is where all the good humanities folks get to go
Mhm.
hang out, right? Is that how that works? So,
Exactly.
thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. So, tell us a little bit about um, Valentine and Saint Valentine in particular.
Mhm.
What time frame are we talking about within the greater Christendom that we should be
Yeah.
paying attention to?
Well, first I got to tell you, St.
Oh,
Patrick was a real person because we have two
okay.
documents that he wrote, but we have no documents from Valentine. So as I said, the jury's out on Valentine.
Okay.
What we have is stories about three different guys around 200 who were all named Valentine, Valentinus.
Okay.
Um, And a little bit of background on that,
Hmm.
Rome in, I don't know, the fifth century, so the 400s, the 500s, the church had just become not only legal, but the state religion. Christianity was the state religion of the Roman Empire. And they were trying to build churches wherever the faith went, wherever it expanded, and they were trying to establish the history of the faith from the start. And so, in a Rome that was kind of crumbled and invaded and depopulated, they knew there were saints, martyrs buried all over the place. And they knew there were stories circulating about these guys. But there really wasn't a lot of straightforward, trustworthy information about a lot of these saints. It was
Wow.
a matter of digging, collecting stories, making assumptions, maybe finding bodies in tombs. So, Valentine was one of these figures about whom at least three stories circulated. The, and we know this because the Jesuits, the Bollandists, who collected notes on saints in the 17th century, found these three stories, these three guys.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
three Valentines, supposedly living around 200 plus. One apparently was a general who fought in northern Africa and got slaughtered with all his troops. They were Christians. So not much
Mhm.
to that story.
No, that's
The other two are kind of alike. One was a priest from Rome, and one was a bishop from near Rome, from Terni. And they both have the same sort of background. They both were proselytizers. They were trying to bring more people into the faith at a time when Christianity was illegal still. And they supposedly lived during the reign of Claudius Gothicus, called
okay.
Gothicus because he spent only 2 years as emperor fighting Germans up in the north.
Ah,
Um, but
fighting the
supposedly,
Goths, right?
yeah,
I
the
mean,
gods.
that's where that would have come from. Okay.
Yep. So supposedly during his reign, there was a crackdown on Christians, and Valentinus, whether bishop or priest, was caught up in it, arrested.
Mm.
And so we have two slightly different stories about what happened to each of those Valentinus's guys. Um, and I'm happy to tell the story if you like, or
Oh,
just
yes. No,
quick.
we want to say, but just for clarity's sake, when you say they were a bishop in Rome, they weren't the bishop of Rome, or
Oh, no, no. And the
this is
bishop
not the
was
Pope,
from,
right? Right.
no, it's not the
Okay.
bishop of Rome. The bishop was from Terni. The guy in Rome was a priest.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, a covert, sneaking around, holding Christian
Sure.
gatherings, stuff like that. So, this one who was a bishop from Terni supposedly was arrested for trying to be, a proselytizer, make people Christians. And this is only coming to us from the 400s or 500s. So he was summoned to Rome because word had got round that he could cure people of this, what was called the falling disease. And,
Mm.
saints were attributed these healing powers sent by God to sort of show people the strength of Christianity. So he gets sent for by a scholar, a rhetor, a sort of professor, philosopher guy, to cure his son. And this guy runs a school with a bunch of visiting Greek scholars. And Valentinus is staying with him, and he says to the rhetor named Cretan, I'll cure your son of this falling disease if you agree to become a Christian. And so Valentine spends the night with the boy, praying over him, Chiron. And the next day, Chiron gets up out of the bed, hale, hearty, perfectly cured of what we think probably was epilepsy. Um,
Interesting.
and so suddenly everyone, Creton, his family, the servants, and even the visiting Greeks decide they'll become Christians. And the Roman Senate hears about this, sends in the troops, takes Valentinus away, beats him up and beheads him, kills the rest of the family. And when the Greeks try to take his body back to Tournai, they get beheaded too. And so
My gracious.
that's one Valentine. You ready for the next
Oh
one?
yeah, the message has been sent, right? And it was loud and clear.
Yeah,
Don't go down this road. Did you guys forget that this is illegal around here? And just in case
exactly.
just by
So,
association, right? I mean, you're in trouble.
yeah.
Right.
And
Wow.
remember, somebody's writing this story at least 2 or more hundred years after this supposedly happened.
Hmm.
So then the third Valentine, who was supposedly, I think, buried in the Via Flaminia, um, this is a Valentinus who's a priest at Rome, and he's arrested for preaching
Right.
Christianity. And he's brought to Claudius Gothicus, who probably wasn't in Rome really, but in the story, he's brought before the emperor. And the emperor says, okay, I'm going to put you under house arrest with this aristocrat named Asterius. And Asterius, if you can convert Valentine from being a Christian, would be made rich. But of course, you know what happened.
Mm.
Valentine arrives at the house and he starts preaching the minute he gets in the house. And this guy, this Asterius, has a daughter who's ill. She's blind. And so the same sort of thing happens. If Valentine's God could open her eyes, he'll convert. And he's thinking, no way, this is going to happen. This guy's just talking all the time. Let's tell him to cure my daughter. So Valentine prays that she can see the light. And there's a metaphor here.
Mm.
Um, and she opens her eyes and looks around. She's cured. So Valentine starts baptizing the household right and left. Everybody gets Christianized. 44 new Christians. And
Wow.
supposedly the emperor finds out and has them all thrown in prison, and Valentine is beheaded. So either way, he loses his head.
Okay.
Um, so these are the stories that were written a couple centuries after he lived. And Valentinus was a very popular name in the
Mm.
Roman Empire. A couple of emperors were named Valentine.
Right. Yeah.
So it makes sense there were a lot of Valentines around. It just doesn't make sense why there were two guys with similar stories who were supposedly St. Valentine's. With their days of death in mid-February,
Okay.
their saints' days, their feast days on the same day. So later on, then, after we've established there is a Valentine and he might be this one guy or this other guy, he gets a reputation supposedly for helping lovers. While he's in prison, supposedly Valentine passed messages between Christian men and women who were in love, or between imprisoned Christians and Roman soldiers who were, somehow he becomes this sort of interlocutor of love rather than an interlocutor of prayer. But
Huh.
it's not in the earliest sources. And then there are scholars who say, oh, wait a minute, Valentine's Day, the 14th of February, that was an old Roman holiday, Lupercalia, on the
Huh.
15th, the Ides of February. It was a day to celebrate the founding of Rome, when supposedly this cult of young men went to the place where, the story, the origins of Rome, where Romulus and Remus were two brothers fostered by a wolf, and they sort of conquered the territory, and Romulus became the one who created Rome. So it celebrates that event. So the young men would go to the place where the wolf nursed the two brothers, and they would have rituals, and they would sacrifice a dog or a wolf and cut strips of the skin.
Hmm.
And then they would run around Rome half naked, whipping young ladies and making them fertile. And supposedly there was some real shenanigans going on, between
Go
America.
figure.
Yeah, big holiday, big holiday. So, the motif develops that the Pope in the fourth or fifth century decided we're getting rid of this like skanky holiday. And instead, we're going to substitute a saint's feast, a saint who presides over Christian love.
Hmm.
But that's not true either. So, but it is a lot of retrospective of scholars wondering why are there more than one Valentine's? Why does it happen in mid-February? Is there an association with earlier religion?
Mhm.
And Valentine, his cult kind of develops. He's not a major saint like one of the apostles or disciples or fathers of the church, but he's popular in some places, and it has to do with whether places claim to have parts of his relics, his bones, or something he touched or something that belonged to him. And in fact, today there are supposed bits of Saint Valentine all over Europe. More than one
Wow.
place claims to have his head. You know, people have his heart or his fingers or something all over the place. But the idea was that if you have a relic of the saint in your church and you have a saint's life that proves that guy a saint, then you have the presence of the saint in your church. It makes it a much holier place. The saint is immanent in that space, and pilgrims can come and connect with the saint there, and he'll carry their prayers to God. So people liked having bits of saint.
Yeah.
What got around about St. Valentine through the Middle Ages was he cured the falling sickness. He became a patron saint of epilepsy.
Wow.
Yeah, and so they thought of him as a healer of diseases. So you get to Brittany in the 11th or 12th century, and a bishop who's facing a big plague in his territory says, "Ah, we have a relic of Saint Valentine. We'll have a ritual parade. We'll take the relics around, and this will help us cure this plague that has come to our town." So that's the kind of thing he was famous for. No love, no lovers, nothing in the traditional cult until we get to Geoffrey Chaucer, who changed
Okay,
everything up.
there's our twist. Hey, we're enjoying a great conversation here with Dr. Lisa Bitel, and we're talking all about Saint Valentine and who he was and who he wasn't, and which one there were, and an amalgamation of stories and any number of things that we're learning a great deal about. So, yeah, so take us. How did Chaucer help to expand on this? Part of the myth, part of the legend, part of the anything else that might be.
I think it's a great connection. I mean, you don't usually credit the explosion of a saints cult to one poet from the Middle Ages, right? However famous that poet might be. Um, so, everybody's got bits of Valentine at this point. Tarragon and Prague and Dublin and Birmingham and all over the place. So he's known as a saint. But what happens with Chaucer is he writes this poem called The Parliament of Fowls.
Hmm. Okay.
And it's an allegorical tale, and he wrote it for the marriage of Anne of Bohemia to Richard II of England, so in the
Okay.
14th century. Um, and he mentions St. Valentine's feast day. And what he says is St. Valentine's Day, when every bird comes there to choose his mate.
Hmm.
So it's the dates were a little different back then. Valentine's Day in the old calendar was a little later than it is now. February was later in the year, more
Right.
spring-like, right? And so what Chaucer's just saying is the day was the start of spring when birds choose their mates. Boy and girl birds get together. Um, and somehow from this, people started talking about Valentine's Day as a day that starts spring and is a day of, spring, love,
Right.
the earth is reborn. Yay, St. Valentine. And people started calling each other their Valentines. I'm writing to you, my love, you're my Valentine. You're like a saint of love to me, that kind of thing. Um, so it turns up in poetry after Chaucer in France and England. Everybody's writing about their Valentines. Christine de Pizan even talks about it she's a famous French poet of the period. So from being a patron saint of people who have epilepsy,
Mm.
Valentine starts to be a patron of people who are in love, who want to be together, who want to be married, are having trouble getting together, are trying to make it happen. Um, and he becomes a sort of hero of lovers, so that Shakespeare and John Donne and all sorts of famous people start assuming he's a patron saint of love.
Because they don't know any different necessarily, because by this time, it's not like the Church of England's talking about a bunch of saints, right? During
Exactly.
during
Yeah,
Shakespeare's time.
exactly.
It's not
By
like you
John
could go
Donne's
down to
time, no,
right.
17th century. But the thing is that I mean, Catholics, of course, had these vitae, these lives of Valentine that still existed and were being read and collected. But saints evolve. I mean,
Mm,
you mentioned Patrick before. Patrick's
yeah.
a good example. From a cranky bishop who was complaining about being terrorized by the natives, he becomes the guy who chases snakes out of Ireland. There are no snakes in Ireland. Anyways, so Valentine goes through this transformation thanks to Chaucer, and it's really not till the 19th century that his fame explodes, because
Mm.
that's the period when it wasn't a change in sainthood, it was a change in how to celebrate holidays. Um, Commercialism, industrial production of, say, greeting cards. You don't have to
Mhm.
write to your Valentine anymore. You can buy a pre-written card. People start to send gifts to their lovers on Valentine's Day. Chocolates, flowers, little tokens. Um, and that's when, like Christmas, like Patrick's Day, like I'm trying to think of other holidays, Easter, it sort of became commercialized and took off. And
Mother's Day, right? I mean,
yeah,
like
Mother's Day, right. I mean,
right.
holidays are a big industry, and religious
Sure.
holidays no less than others. And Valentine's isn't really a religious holiday anymore, but it is a very famous one that people celebrate. And thanks to some guy who got his head taken off in the fourth century, so that's third century, who knows?
So either Valentine that may have. All right, let's back up because this is so cool for so many different reasons. All right, so the sainthood that was put onto Valentine, was that the priest or was it the other one who cured
The
the
bishop.
epilepsy?
It was both.
So it's either one.
In the Middle Ages, people went to early Middle Ages anyway. People visited both graves of both Valentines.
So therefore, you could get more relics, right? You could double the
Right,
number of
two
relics.
bodies. I don't know. I don't know what was left. Oftentimes they had trouble finding bodies, but apparently they thought they had Valentines. There are great stories from the Middle Ages about that. People stumbling on bodies and thinking, could that be a saint? What saint would it be? And then a miraculous letter arrives from Rome to say, hey, you got Saint Severus there. We attest that he's a saint. So, it was all a little mysterious in the early Middle Ages.
So how did somebody become a saint then as the process that somebody today? I mean, right? There's
Mhm.
always just such a process now, right?
Yeah,
That anybody
yeah.
would go through to actually be able to get sainthood. My
Although
guess
John
is
Paul
it
loosened
was
it a
nothing
little.
like that. Okay, back in the Middle Ages.
Yeah, no, there wasn't. It was by acclaim, because Valentine wouldn't have been well known outside of the Roman area early on, right?
Mm,
Everything was pretty local, and Rome, the Vatican, the Pope wasn't really the Pope at that point. He was Bishop of Rome. He didn't have power over other parts of the of Christendom. So it was people recognized a saint, and usually it had to do with witnessing miracles. It wasn't just that a person was very devout or very
mm.
penitent or ascetic, but whatever virtus God gave to that saint had to be demonstrated in some fantastic way. And then people realized, oh, you will be a very potent patron for me. And of course, the stories about the saints suggest that the miracles continued after the saint died. So people just had to recognize. And of course, there was a politics to it,
Sure.
as everything has a politics. But at any rate, lots and lots of saints were made. And that's why in the 60s in Vatican II, a lot of saints were taken off the calendar of feast days because they were dubious. They didn't have a documented history. So Valentine at least has two vitae, that
Wow.
prove him to have been, or they to have been a saint. But it was only in about the 12 or 1300s that the Vatican, the Pope was strong enough that his committees could take a hand and they could have canonization procedures. And somebody making sure that whoever got sainted really was a saint, really had a body, really had a history, was
Right.
documented.
Right. Well, I'm guessing just because somebody was martyred after the edict against the Christians or any other thing that would have happened to the early church in that this time period that we're talking about and otherwise, right? That wasn't that uncommon by any stretch. I mean, there were plenty of people who were martyred for their faith, for the
There
church.
were
The
plenty. There
question
weren't as
is
many as people tend to think. You had to come out and be in the face of soldiers or the government to get martyred, But there
but
were
the
quite a few.
miraculous piece, right? Doing the miracles, there's the
Yeah.
thing, right? And so if you're martyred and miracle, you might be a little bit further up the food chain, right? About
Yeah.
moving towards
Martyred and
sainthood.
defiant. That was good too. But the doctrine has always been there are saints everywhere who are not known. There are saints. But at any rate, the ones that were known had to be well documented by the end of the Middle Ages, documented. So sainthood changed quite a lot.
Wow. So does Saint Valentine's have a feast day still today after
He
Vatican II?
does, yeah. And
Yeah.
there are lots of saints who are on local calendars, like Saint Christopher, for example,
Hmm.
but not on the official calendar of the whole church.
Wow. What a fascinating thing that somebody was able to kind of take, you know, this poem, right, that Chaucer writes, and I guess because it was on an occasion of a marriage and love and spring
Mhm.
and birds finding each other to be able to, unless I mean, as compared to if he was writing one on somebody's birthday, maybe it didn't really, it didn't really make the cut, right, or
It
their
snowed
funeral.
today,
I got
But
a poem for her funeral, and I'd like to be able to write that. That's not necessarily lining up with
oh,
love and how we need to be
not
able
romantic. But
to.
it is, I find it fascinating the way that saints can adapt to serve the people who are devoted to them.
Mm,
How people can remake saints and saints then respond in a way, in a cultic way. So Valentine took out these, you see him depicted today. He's wearing like red outfits and, leaning over towards lovers or something like that, instead of standing over somebody having an epileptic fit.
right, right,
So
right, right. How fantastic to know all that stuff, right? I mean, that's part of why we enjoy doing Christian history is being able to hear some of the other sides and the stories that how did we get here and how did something else like that actually take place. So
And I take a comical tone when I tell this, but the whole process over thousands of years of saints, how saints came to be and how they come to be something else. I mean, lots of historians are busy working on this subject because it's just so amazing and complex.
yes, yes, and where the records are and piecing together the story and all the rest of that. If there wasn't a little
Opinions.
mystery to it, right, then it wouldn't be as
Yeah,
fun to go figure out. So that's
right.
that's
So
part
yeah,
of it too. And I wore a red shirt today, by the way,
yeah,
just
I saw.
just to make that just as an extra, okay, for us to
Yeah,
be able to pull all of that together.
should have
Thank
done.
you so much for sharing some time with us today and helping us learn a little bit more about the things that you know and the things
It's
that we
always fun talking about saints. Saints Supply, that's me.
say that's you. So if I need to do a go-to Saints again, I need some Saints
Mhm.
101. I know where to find you, right?
Yep, you do.
That's fantastic. Hey, we hope everybody's enjoyed this episode, and remember, follow us on YouTube here or on X, and we're also on Spotify, and we're on Apple, where you can find it as well as follow us there to learn about different events that happen every single day in Christian history. And so, on behalf of the Center for Christian History and the Blue and Gold Media Group at Mississippi College, thanks for joining us.
Love, peace, and understanding.